Close your eyes. Make a wish. Count to 3. Come with me and you'll be.
This family video celebrates the 100th anniversary of Wilma Ardolla McCafferty, who was born in Lawrence, Michigan, 100 years ago this year. Lawrence, Baraga, Michigan, was a Native American residence that Heather and I visited on one occasion when we were doing a story on gaming and golf. The family moved basically they had cut down most of the woods. The family moved to Mansalona, Michigan, which is a huge lumbering town at the time. And my grandfather set up life there with his 4 children, Wilma, Lucille, Ernie, Elta, and a new wife and daughter, Mary. Left to right is my grandfather, Elta, a gentleman I do not recognize, Mary, Lucille. The tall person is my Uncle Ernie, and my mother. Here's a later picture of some kind of family reunion where from left to right you can see my mother and her sister Lucille. I'm not sure the rest of the folks, but on on the person in the purple is my grandmother Maddie, and then Elta, and then my grandfather Tom. My grandfather had purchased during his lifetime a little store in a town called Dara. And Dara was a town which we visited lately. There's nothing but an old mobile home there now. But it used to have a church. And then on the other side of the road was my grandfather had this store, Dara store. And then the store was the mailboxes. So everybody got their mail at the, I guess, general store you would call it. There was a big pot-bellied stove in there during the winter. And I can remember sometimes coming up there, my grandfather always had the Detroit Tiger baseball game on when they were playing. So I remember most of the family after graduation, my mother graduated from Mansalona High School. After that, they moved to Detroit. This is where everybody, the war years were coming. Detroit was the arsenal of democracy and bright lights. This is a photo of my mother and Lucille on Belle Isle back in the early 40s. My Uncle Ernie went into the service in the 40s during World War II, served as an infantryman, and had gotten some ribbons. He was in quite a bit of the action. He married a German war bride who she was raped by a German officer, and their son was named Harry. It's the only son they had between them, and they had a good life. And my uncle became a truck driver, and he spent most of his life driving U.S. mail trucks. This is a shot of my mother and Elta in Detroit. Everybody kind of stayed around one another as far as where they lived. We lived in 933 West Kirby, and there was my grandmother had a duplex there. She rented out. It had 4 or 5 apartments in there. Here's a nice shot of my mother. She was kind of a young lass. She was a waitress at the time, and where my father met her in a restaurant. And they seemed like they had a good time. I think it's one of the great photos here that I've always enjoyed. Who doesn't like a photo like that? Of course, my father's a pilot, so this is, you could really capture a woman's attention. You take her up and fly her around a little bit, so that was always one of his big deals. So they had a very, very nice courtship, as I understand. And then in 1943, my father was kind of hired by the government to was kind of an Air Corps. Wasn't really in the Army or anything like it. Was a civilian aeronautics instructor. So with that, my father headed down to Florida. This is a shot of my father with some of his students. You can see he has the black uniform on there. I imagine that's kind of how they distinguish each other down there. And then about the first part of the year, my father, and it's be 1944, my father married my new mother, Wilma Corey, who became Wilma McCafferty. I was, of course, misplaced in a sailor suit, but then again, I didn't have a clue. My father went back down and took us with him, and he did a lot of flying out of Avon Park Air Force Range, Pensacola, Lakeland School of Aeronautics. So he had 2 or 3 different airports around there that he was flying out of. My father was a bus driver in Detroit, and he also worked for Mills Bakery and sold for the Fuller Brush Company. My school was the Tilden Elementary School. Now, my buddy was Jimmy Miller and Jackie Henderson. One of Jackie Henderson's friends said, "Hey, Jackie, can you beat up Art?" He said, "Sure," and he went ahead and beat me up. Never forgot that. This is a football I got from my Uncle Ernie, who was also in the war, and came back and gave me his ribbons and medals, which somehow I lost, and this football. 1948, we moved to White Lake. This is the Lodge Freeway came through and uprooted many people in Detroit. This is the house my father spotted from the air. It cost $3,500. And my mother, when she drove up, we had this truck driving all of our goods from Detroit, pulled up to the gate. She just started weeping. So we got into that house, and we just started building from there. We had a chicken coop and a big garden, a new septic tank, so we did a lot of painting. My dad would get bricks from all the construction down in Detroit, and we had paved walks, and so he really worked hard to kind of spiff this place up. You'll see in this photo here that we have my mother, Jim, Muriel, Shirley, and then, of course, there's myself. There's Jim and Muriel. Jim was a big man. I couldn't believe one of the dinners we had, Muriel was making spaghetti, and she brought this big bowl, and she was bringing it with 2 hands, and I thought she was going to put the big bowl in front of the table, but she put the big bowl in front of Jim. I never forgot that. And then we got another big bowl for the rest of us. Well, here we are in the Lake Grove house. It was getting kind of a nice little house. We got it fixed up, painted it, and all that. And so we, just a lot of elbow grease. And there's my grandmother and myself, and then my dad and Ma. And then here's again my father, my mother, myself. And then my dad built a new house, right? The lot next door. He bought a lot of lots around his house. And this here took about a year to put together. We did most of the work ourselves. And then, as you can see, it's got a nice fireplace, and it was really nice. Everything was new. I had my own bedroom. It was great. So it was really kind of a nice house. Then Grandma came in from Detroit, and she bought this as a summer home. Grandma always seemed to have a little bit of money, so she bought this cottage right next door. And she settled down with Poochie, who was her dog for many, many years. And she just enjoyed coming out to the country. I mean, after all, that's where she was from, in New Brunswick. And my grandfather, he rolled into town, and he built his own home as well, right across from Grandma's, or right behind it. And so we had the old McCafferty compound with three of us in this one corner of this block in White Lake. Father continued to fly, and also worked as a meat cutter at A&P. And then he started getting into real estate. Really kind of started making some real money. Here he is right now having a cup of coffee with his realtor was called Ward Partridge. Partridge is the bird to see. That was their logo. 1958. Well, the move to Waterford. I'm a senior in Milford High School, and my father bought a nice place right across from the airport, something he always wanted to do. My father's starting to pick up some money now. And so it was like 3.5 acres on a little lake, and it was pretty cool. I, in turn, was finished up from Milford High School. Flying service, he had a heart attack in 1961, which wouldn't let him fly anymore. But during the time just before that happened, that was in the late 50s, but he started selling airplanes. So sales, charter, training, and I still have the sign in the house. And my mother got back into the workforce after I left, and they bought this Bob's Submarine Pizza Shop in Waterford. For about 2.5 or 3 years, she was making more money than I was as a teacher, so she was that was pretty good. So they started accumulating a little bit of money then, and starting to settle into a very comfortable life. This is a photo of my father and a lady by the name of Faye Kirk. She was a pioneer woman's flyer aviator. This is something very rare, and so she was highly regarded as a real pioneer in air flight. And of course, would hang around my dad as a pilot. Very nice lady. Very, very interesting to hear her talk about her tales. This photo here is a photo of my mother and father in the kitchen. Basically, this is the start of marriage life for me. It's the photo of my mother and I at the wedding. I married Leslie Evans. Her father was Chuck Hibner, and Doris Hibner were her parents. Leslie's father was killed in World War II on the invasion of Europe. Met her at Oakland University, and we had two great kids in our union, Michael and Heather. This is part of the group. My grandfather's on the left, my father, myself in the back, Heather, Leslie, and Michael. This is a photo of my mother, father, and Doris and Chuck Hibner. This is on the... We always remained friendly despite the divorce. It wasn't a bitter divorce, it's just something that happened. This is when I graduated with my doctorate. We all got together, and it was kind of a nice reunion. This is my father and mother had this was kind of the place where people from my mother's sister would come out. For many years we always used to go there, but now we had this very nice home, 3.5 acres. My dad at that time had turned into a gentleman farmer. My mother which always had taken care of the books, still took care of the family finances, and it was always a place where we would go there for Sunday for dinner or picnic or something to that effect. So my mother with Heather, the lovely Heather. And this is a shot with Michael McCafferty when he was very, very young. This is a shot of my mother and father in the kitchen on Christmas Day.
Juice jar. Don't wave on me. You think you're a ham.
That's right. My mother got very involved with candle making. In fact, so involved, she received really kind of a piece of paper, a diploma type thing, and she had went to a candle school. And she really had developed into quite a candle maker. She made candles of every type of figurine. In fact, my mother used to carry a lot of knickknacks. They were everywhere, all porcelain knickknacks from all over the world, and stones, just a lot of artifacts, and they covered the entire home. In fact, my dad one time, I remember him saying, "Wilma, we don't have any more space on the shelves or any place in the house." So my mother got angry, kind of. She never got angry too much, and they all disappeared. And then slowly they crept back into the spaces that they had been vacated. Anyway, she got really involved in candle making. She got involved in such a degree that when I was a community school director at Milford High School, I created a class called candle making. And I brought my mother in to teach the students. And it wasn't a very big class, 7 or 8 people, but I let the class go because, I was the boss. And about 2 weeks into the class, they all started going to my mother and father's home where she could show them how all the candles were made. And so it was really a very exciting time for her. She had an opportunity to be a teacher and show off the skills that she had, and they were really quite, she did, as you can see in this little short video, a lot of different types of candles.
It's been our candle?
Yeah.
Did you meet Chinese people?
I'll give you a couple of
Got
Yeah.
one here.
Yeah.
Got one.
Oh, really?
And let's see, and I've got this guy. Isn't he Chinese? Is this Chinese?
Yeah.
Yeah, so fun.
He's a Miller,
For good
Miller monk, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Monk, yeah.
Uh-huh.
They're different.
Here's my mother on a touring car. I believe they're in Ireland. They traveled, I think probably the first, about 3 or 4 year period where they traveled together. And then my mother, who had varicose veins and had some surgery on them, it became kind of difficult for her to get around. So my father then joined a group which was called Nomads. Nomads had their own personal jet down at Metro Airport, and they used to go on some pretty exotic trips all over the world. And so my father kept traveling. My mother basically stayed home after those initial travels. I think she did get to Italy, Spain, Egypt. So she had her share of travel, but after she decided to hang it up, she traveled no more. This is my mom in her kitchen. She just always had this together. This is always her spot. The poem was, it was just kind of a spectacular garden. They had a very nice home that had lots of room, 2-car garage, all paid for. They had a pretty good size, for them, a lake. It was, I guess, a cross between a pond and a lake. And so they had 3.5 acres. My dad bought another acre beside his place. And after a while, they did after a while, they built a 10-room apartment building right in front of them, facing M59. So life was good. They had, my mother loved animals. I mean, we always had a lot of cats and dogs, and they would just kind of come in. They were basically dogs that showed up or cats that showed up. This is a shot of my mother and father with Dr. Stu Tubbs from Eastern Michigan University. And when they were building the new College of Business, I bought a bench for them with their name inscribed, and it was in the hallway where students could sit down and relax. And so this was I brought them in to see that. So this was kind of an exciting day for them. Here, their son was, now a administrator at Eastern Michigan University, and I'm kind of hanging around with a lot of very educated people, and this was a very, very exciting time for them. Well, here as you can see, my mother's getting, from her photo, you can see that cancer has kind of grabbed hold of her pretty seriously. I think this may be one of the last photos we have with her and my dad and Michael and Heather. We did have a Christmas together, which we'll show you a little bit of footage of. I was just at that point in time getting started on being a videographer, and I was clueless on some of the lighting aspects, but anyways, you can look on from there.
Did you just get it for me?
No, that's not from us.
I don't know how come there wasn't a name on it. Didn't climb the mountain. Good.
Well, tell Kitty you liked it.
This isn't everything.
Now this is for Grandpa. You give him that big heavy box and this together. Now try and lift it, Heather. It is terrible.
Oh my God. Very heavy.
I lifted that and I couldn't believe it.
I just wonder what that might be.
Were you putting
There's
Dad's over there?
there's some things there, Michael. I had to put them there to keep them away from it.
Okay.
I think that's one's for me. It looks like bubble bath. Oh.
Nice to light the campfire. I don't go camping.
Oh, wait till you get into a Herschel. Quit being so.
Ma, this is she was a wonderful mother, and she inherited me in 1943. She never had any kids of her own, but my dad was always working. His job was always about 40 miles away. So my mother and I spent all kinds of time together. We grew up together. She was just a wonderful lady. I really enjoyed her, and she was a great mom. And my folks had after working so hard, and they did work awfully hard, they retired at their home on Highland Road, and they enjoyed their life for about 15 or 20 years where they didn't have to work. They had a big garden, and that was kind of it. But it was a good marriage, and they were the most successful siblings of both families, and everyone were, I wouldn't say envious, but they certainly were happy that they had achieved so much in their lives. So, 100-year anniversary of my mother here in 2020.